There are many ways to interact with Azure to create and manage Azure resources. You can use a web-based portal, which we're going to look at here very soon. You can use a mobile app on your phone or tablet. You can use software development applications like Visual Studio. You can use command line tools. Seriously, there are a lot of options, and because of that, Microsoft needed a way to ensure that all of these options create and manage resources in a way that's repeatable, predictable, and reliable. In other words, no matter which tool is used, resources need to always be created and managed in exactly the same way. So for that reason, Microsoft created Azure Resource Manager, or ARM. ARM uses templates to deploy Azure resources in a predictable way, and an ARM template is really just a text file that defines Azure resources that ARM needs to create or manage. The bottom line is, no matter how you create or manage your resources, ARM is always going to be doing the work under the hood. So we've laid a lot of groundwork so far. I think we've covered enough of the foundation that we can now start looking at some Azure concepts with some demos, and we'll start with a quick demo of ARM templates. Now before we do that, let me just say that you don't have to understand ARM templates to use Azure. I'm only showing you an ARM template because I think it provides more context into how Azure works. If you look at the demo that we're about to go through and you start to think this is too complex or it's not really interesting at all to me, don't worry. So that said, let's quickly have a look at an ARM template. This is the Azure portal. And a couple weeks ago, I created a virtual machine, an IaaS virtual machine in Azure, and you can see that listed here. It's called VM1. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you an ARM template that can be used to deploy VM1. So I'm going to click on it here, and that'll open this screen. This is the management screen for that virtual machine. Gives me all of the different pieces of information about that virtual machine, how it's configured. It also allows me to manage it using this menu along the left-hand side. These are common constructs that you'll get used to in the demos that we're going to show you're going to see. Very similar screens with other Azure services. In this case, we want to look at an ARM template. We want to look at the template that's used for deploying this virtual machine by ARM. So I'm going to scroll down in this list and go all the way down to automation, and I'm going to click Export Template. Now you'll have this particular menu item on every Azure resource that you create. Some of these menu items are specific to virtual machines, but this one is going to be available to you no matter what kind of resource you're using because it's the ARM template. Oh, I'll click that, and just as to get a little more real estate, I'm going to click this little arrow here and collapse that. So this that you're looking at right here, if you're familiar with XML, which is extensible markup language, it's used frequently on the internet. You don't have to be, but I'm just mentioning it in case you look at this and say, oh, that looks like XML. Well, it is XML. It's a text file. As I said before, it's in a format called JSON, which is JavaScript Object Notation if you're interested in knowing that. And it just describes this virtual machine. Not just this virtual machine, but also all the other resources needed for this virtual machine. For example, networks. You have to have a network that this virtual machine is connected to, otherwise you wouldn't be able to access it, or it wouldn't be able to access anything else. So that's defined here as well. And we can see the template here obviously, and we can go down here and see that there is a resources section, and we see different types of resources here. One is Microsoft.compute/virtual machines. That string right there is actually called a resource provider. It's the virtual machines resource provider, and the virtual machines resource provider knows all about virtual machines. It knows how to create them. It understands all the different properties of virtual machines. And so when ARM needs a virtual machine created, it just hands off that request to that resource provider, and the resource provider does all the work for it so it can We can see down here the size of this virtual machine. We can see here that it has an OS disk that's a Linux disk. So this virtual machine is running Linux. I can scroll down further, go through some of this other stuff, and I'll see that there is a network interface here. That's defined for this. It's a virtual network interface. We're going to talk about virtual networks later. So the point I'm making is that this template is used to deploy this virtual machine using ARM. Now you might think to yourself, if I wanted to use this template to deploy another virtual machine that's just like this one, could I do that? Yes, you can. And in fact, ARM provides this concept of parameters, which I can open up here that allows you to reuse templates. So there are parameters here for the name. If I click right here, I'll see this parameter right here. This is the name parameter for the virtual machine. It defaults to VM1, but what that means is if you use this template, one of the pieces of information that you'll have to supply in order to use this template to create a virtual machine is the name, and you can't have two VMS by the same name, so you'd have to use a name other than VM1. So by defining this as a parameter, that means that ARM will ask you when you use this template, what name do you want to give this virtual machine you're creating? So that's the way that parameters work. So this is an ARM template. I'll add one more thing to this. The development of ARM templates is a pretty advanced topic. We're not going to go into it in this course. Most people who use Azure don't ever even worry about ARM templates. It's just one of those things that happens under the hood. Don't even have to think about it. But there are some people who will develop their own ARM templates. And normally those people will not just go out here and grab the template off the Azure portal. They'll create it themselves because they want it to be highly customized for exactly what they're looking for. You don't have to understand ARM templates, as I said a second ago, but now you know what they are, you know what they look like. And if you happen to see any snippets of this kind of thing as you're exploring Azure, you're now going to recognize that, hey, that's from an ARM template.